My name is Austin Morgan, and I am an alcoholic. Thank you, Bruce, for the kind words. I'm very grateful to be asked to speak here. Also really grateful to Max for reading how it works and for Megan reading the preamble. Megan is my wife. We will be married 3 years in June. And clap for that. Hey, people staying married. It has been a real joy to be sponsored by her. So I learn so much every day, and I say that only half kidding. She is very very down to earth and makes things very simple that I can make very complicated, and she really helps kind of round things out sometimes. So I'm really grateful for all that. Also grateful to everyone who put this whole thing together. I'm always amazed when they do, which means I should probably thank mostly Al-Anons, because if drunks were in charge, this would not really... We'd have 2 tables and 6 chairs and a 12-cup Mr. Coffee pot and then wonder why nobody showed up. So glad some people that know how to organize got involved. My story, my drinking, I hear people say a lot of things. You know, when I drink, I get angry. When I drink, I'm selfish. When I drink, I drink. And that's how I drink. And it can be characterized by obsession, powerlessness, and unmanageability. And before I ever even really knew anything about the steps or the program of AA, that was the summary of my life since the day I was born, was obsession and powerlessness and unmanageability, and all my efforts were to fight that. And human beings as a whole, I don't really feel like are equipped to be all-powerful or to manage, but that shortcoming is most obvious in real drunks. Our inability to do things, especially when we're in our cups, is so much clearer. And from a young age, you know, I grew up in western Kansas in a really small town. Dad was a farmer and a preacher. Both of my grandmothers were preachers, and in non-denominational, gospel-centered Christian faiths. My mother wasn't a preacher, but she griped all the time, so I always counted her efforts. And so throughout my life, and I only say this because, we hear a lot, AA is a program spiritual in nature. The idea that there's a difference between spirituality and religion was not new to me when I showed up to AA. It was the faith that I'd grown up with. You know, spirituality is about a relationship with Christ, not about rules and rituals and regulations. And, you know, in my household growing up, a couple main things. You know, religion was a bad word and Jesus was a good word. And number 2 was my parents didn't drink at all. Completely teetotalers. I have heard most alcoholics' parents are either teetotalers or they're alcoholics. So if that's true, I'm on the teetotaler side. One thing I always noticed growing up in a small town where everything's pretty much about football, beer, and girls is we didn't have as much fun as they did. And everything was serious and heavy and spiritual and about your next ministry move and your next help and your next consideration. And I, from a young age, recognized this is not necessarily what I want to do. I didn't know until I drank that was what I wanted to do. I didn't discover truly that drinking was what I wanted to do until years later. And it wasn't even when I first started drinking alcoholically. When I first really understood that alcohol was my solution, jumped clear forward from birth to 2004, was when I got my second DUI. And I always love to say second because then that means there's a first. And especially with alcoholics, we can get around and we talk about, jail sentences and DUIs. And, it's the way normal people would talk about degrees or jobs or something. And so, and we just kind of say, my first DUI was in Manhattan, Kansas. My second was in Wichita, and I moved on from there. And so my second DUI was in Wichita, and I was drinking at a place down on South Rock called South Rock Billiards. And later in the evening, and I had told them I wanted another drink, and they had told me they weren't going to give me one. And I was pretty self-aware and understood some bigger things, and I knew I didn't need that kind of toxic energy in my life. With who I am and what I do, and I watch the talk shows, and you're really supposed to get negative people away from you. And if you guys are going to stand here and tell me that just because I can't stay on a bar stool, I've had too much, I don't need your narrow-minded, judgmental attitudes. So I'll take the high road, and I'm going to just leave and make this easy on everybody. And God will count my deeds for righteousness because of how much I've done here. And so I walked out, and I got in the car, and, my apartment was south of there. I peeled out going north. And I kind of remember wanting to go to McDonald's. I don't really remember exactly what I had in mind. And that's the last thing I remember until I wake up in the car, seat reclined, car's turned off, the keys are on the passenger floorboard, and there's a policeman with a mag light tapping on the window. And it's got that real high-pitched ding, 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 ding. And I'm kind of looking around and realizing, I'm not on my floor or my couch, and that's usually where I sleep. This is interesting. And so the cop, kind of does this motion. And that whole thing about, if you're parked and the car's off and the keys are out of reach, you can't get a DUI is true unless you're parked in the intersection of Harry and Rock. And it wasn't even like I wrecked and rolled into the intersection. I pulled into the intersection, put the car, turned it off, put it in park, reclined the seat, and just said, I'm just going to finish it right here. I'm just done for tonight. And the cop was laughing just as hard as you guys are. He was really impressed with this. And so I turned accessory on so I can crack the window, and just this much window cracked. He's already pulling back, let's get you out, man. So I step out and kind of do that little drunk knee bender thing you do when you're trying to walk. And the cop says, if you'd have done this just like 30 feet over there, it'd have been fine. But you did it in the street. And so, it's 1:30 in the morning. There's cars backed up honking and screaming at me. And so they cuff me and take me to jail. I had to stay overnight. And then the next morning, this is when it's very important, if you're an active alcoholic, to have what I like to call emergency contacts. You need at least 3, because the other 2 are going to be pissed, and they're not going to answer. And then you can rotate them and keep them coming at you. And so the beauty of a good emergency contact is they will gripe at you. They'll be upset with you. They will give you an earful. But they've got way too much of a savior complex to not come save the day. I was great at being the wounded bird that somebody was going to fix. And then, so I called this probably Al-Anon gal by this point. And so she came and picked me up. And so we're driving back to my apartment. Everything to this point in the story does not make me an alcoholic. I know a lot of heavy drinkers that have a story about like that. And they probably have some problems, and maybe they ignore their kids more than they should. Maybe they're not real active in church. I don't know. But they're not alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is that on the way back to that apartment, with her driving, giving me this earful, I've been waiting on this, and you blah, 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 blah. And it's not even nails on a chalkboard doesn't describe how much I shouldn't have to listen to this. But it's starting to make sense. Some of her junk is really starting to sound, I really might need to change some things. this is a really bad way to live. I mean, it's 8 o'clock on a Friday morning, and I did this on Thursday. All of a sudden, what makes me an alcoholic is in the middle of her speech, I remembered there's a half a gallon of Weller's in that freezer at my apartment. And I'm going to get there. And this is all going to be fine. And all this junk you're talking, it got laughable to think she really thought I cared at this point. Because everything I need is in that freezer. And I played along, and I boo-hooed, and I told her how bad I'd been, how different I was going to be. And you want to keep the emergency contacts on the hook. And so I walked in my apartment, pulled that half a gallon of Weller's out of the freezer, got a glass of ice, glug, 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 glug. Diet Coke, glug. And I got to the bottom of that drink, and I couldn't have told you why I had ever been irritated that day. That car wasn't an impound, work wasn't upset, things were going to be fine. And God is my witness. If the bottom of a drink still did that, I'd not be standing here. I would not have ever gone to AA. I never would have cared about any of you. I'd have been this close to missing all of it. That's what I think whenever I'm even at a meeting, anywhere I am with AA. I almost missed all this. And if I'm really honest about why I didn't miss this, it's because I went through years of that being a solution. And then it wasn't. And then it wasn't. You guys were not the first option. And as long as that drink is going to flip that switch, I would not have come to see you. I mean, that was in 2004. My sobriety date's January 23rd, 2012. Drinking Weller's at 9 o'clock in the morning, the day after a DUI, at treatment, they'd say you're done. And I was 8 years away from thinking AA was a legit option. Now, I had to go to some meetings for that DUI. I had to do 90 meetings. Franklin always remembers that I say this, because this was what I took away from the meetings I went to in AA. Two things. One, it was for people who didn't want to drink. And two, it was for people who were real screwed up. I have not deviated one bit from thinking that's what this is for. I just finally decided I was one of those people. I listened. I was respectful. I don't remember whether or not I said I was an alcoholic, but I just kind of thought, if you didn't want to drink and you were a total freaking mess, this would be the organization for you. I'm powerful, and I'm managing. Things are fine. My mom's dropping me off at these meetings, and then somebody else is picking me up for work. Things are fine. This is good. I'm learning. Everybody gets in a rut, And so, from that point forward, throughout that next 8 years, I went through a variety of jobs. And maybe this is where some of you can identify too. Because every job I got, no matter how different it was than the last one, they just never quite celebrated me the way they were supposed to. They always had these big attitudes about smelling in the mornings and leaving early. I was a functioning alcoholic. I only called in on Mondays and Thursdays and left early on Fridays and, stunk the other 3 days. But, I just wish everybody could be more understanding and know my intentions are good here. It's just I'm going through a lot. I've struggled. Throughout all of that, I had never been married. I had never had any kids. That was a very diligent decision. Obviously a lot of drunks tend to go through marriages, as I've attended meetings and discovered. I never, ever thought of that as a very good cure for my issue. The girls were griping enough living across town. Why would I want one at my house? I did not get that in the least. So I had avoided that like the plague, any kind of accountability. The job was always the only accountable thing I had. Prior to that, I'd left Kansas State with 159 credit hours and no degree. And even being able to do that should be some kind of award, that you can string that many college hours together and not have anything except debt and a DUI to show for it. And so I was only about 15, 16 hours away. I went back to Wichita State, finished a bachelor's degree, because that was really my problem. I would drink less if I had just kind of kick it all in. And that degree, and nothing changed. Nothing changed. So I got a job. I was in the mortgage business for a while, and then I did this job, and then I did that job. Always thinking this is going to stop. This will stop when. This will stop if. I just need to, life would fall apart, but unsystematically. Work would get better. No one would talk to me, so I just need to improve my relationships. Well, then work would get worse. And all of a sudden, I just think I need to get everything going good all at the same time. This is a management issue. We'll regroup. We'll rethink. We'll talk about this. We'll try again tomorrow, but for today I'm getting hammered. Tomorrow's another day. I'd seen, again, the talk shows told me all the cliches that I needed to sound like I kind of halfway knew. And my parents, completely in the dark about alcoholism, kind of halfway had to buy it. They were really the only people in my life. They heard this stuff too. They'd never read. I was a selfish, self-seeking, self-absorbed drunk. They didn't know that was the heart of this problem. They were worried about pain and triggers and all the stuff the TV shows talk about. So when I told them it was their fault, they kind of had to go along with it. They'll give you great justifications if you watch enough of the shows. And so I keep going through these painful experiences, calling them. Well, this time, well, that time. And we'll jump up to Christmas right around 07, 08. I was a daily drinker by that time. And wasn't going out a whole lot anymore. Wasn't just bartenders judging me. It'd be like anybody that was there when I drank would judge me. And my parents were coming to town. So the preacher and his wife. And I had New Year's Eve day off, and I had Christmas Eve day off and Christmas day off. And they were coming up on Christmas Eve day. So I got up that morning about 10 and decided to start cleaning the house and getting ready for them, and really getting ready to not drink for 3 days, because that was the biggest test when they were around. I could still string together a few days, and they were never very grateful for it. They had no idea what it took in my position to not drink for them, and then to walk in and get a little naggy about stuff. My God, if you knew what it took for me to stay sober for 3 days, you'd show up with money and presents. And so I'm thinking about this as I'm cleaning this house and how ungrateful they always are. And I open the freezer, and there is a frosty bottle of vodka. And I was thinking about, they're going to get here, but... And I know nothing else to describe it except I had to. I had to. When our literature tells us about no human defense against the first drink, it wasn't like I was weighing options and thinking about consequences. I was seeing the absolute horror show tonight was going to be if I took that drink right now. I'm watching myself pour Stolies across the top eyes. And I drank that down, and I thought, it's just going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Now, I remember now why I do this, and that it makes things okay. Everything's going to be great. I might smell a little bit, but I'll be in a better mood. They'll be appreciative when they get here. And so that was what I did. Well, by the time they got there, I was halfway passed out, halfway blacked out. They come in to me kind of staggering around, and I don't really remember a lot about it. I just remember passing out on the couch, and I woke up the next morning, and my mom went to my grandma's. She wasn't there. My dad was there, sitting at the kitchen table. And he said I wanted to talk about a couple things. And so I sit down with him, and he says, I've been praying about this, and either you're an alcoholic or you hate us. And if you're an alcoholic, we'll do everything we can to help you get well. But if you hate us, we will leave you alone. Because if you have a choice in this, and this is what you do, this is how you treat people you hate. Well, I didn't pick alcoholic. Because, it'd been a great after-school special. I mean, isn't that where you're supposed to go to treatment? Yeah, I realize now I'm horrible drunk, and you're right, and I've just been waiting for somebody to tell me how bad I am. And then I'd quit. It didn't work that way for me. And I said what alcoholics say when they're not done drinking. And it all comes down to, this is your fault. I don't really remember asking you a thing. So if there's problems here, I think you got them. Because I'm managing just fine. And so I listed off a bunch of issues I had with Pastor Kent Morgan. And he sat there and listened to all of it. And he said, does this help? Does this help? And I'm sitting there listening to myself say it, and it didn't help. It didn't help. I knew it was a lie. I knew I did not know why I was doing this, but I was 100% sure it doesn't have anything to do with them. But I also know if I don't do this, there's one thing left to do, and it's empty it all out and get going and not drink anymore. And they left town the next day, kind of halfway, I guess, got it together. So that was maybe 4 years before I decided to get sober. And I'll jump to the last 2 years, because I talked about alcohol not being my problem. Alcohol was my solution. And so there was about a 3 to 6 month window, somewhere in there, a couple years before I came to see you guys, where it just stopped. And the beauty of any day that I had was I could wake up, and whether I could start drinking right away or I had to wait until after work, the minute even the proposition of drinking happening came into my mind, it would just bring color to my whole world. The drive home might as well have been from a Disney movie, because waiting in the garage is all I need. And at some point, it just quit being there. And true fear and incomprehensible demoralization set in that I'm going to get home, and I'm going to pour that drink, and I'm going to have the third one, and the fifth one, and the ninth one, and everything else I can get my hands on, and this is not going to quit. This is not going to go away. And I've traded everything in my life for the right to do this, and it is not doing it. This was a real simple agreement. I'll give you everything. You make the switch flip, and the switch quit flipping. And then I drank another 2 years. Drank another 2 years. And on January 22nd of 2012, I was sitting in my garage with a half a gallon of vodka. Sunday afternoon, and the garage door open. Should have been a perfect day. It's about 55 degrees, crisp. And this is on the spiritual side of things, I can honestly say I truly heard God speak to me and say, this is not punishment, and this is not consequence. This is reward. This is what you wanted, and now you've got it. To be left alone, to do what you want, to drink how you want, to drink when you want. Nobody to complain. Phone's not ringing. Doorbell ain't ringing in a couple years now. You got what you want, and here it is. And it was the loneliest, most painful, most absence of God I have ever had in my life. And I went to bed that night. I called my mother. And the short version of the conversation is, she said, what are you going to do different? And I said, tomorrow I'll go to an AA meeting. And she said, okay. Because they were done. I mean, Dad wouldn't even get on the phone anymore. And I got up that next day, and I went to work. And everything just started to have this imminent doom about it, because I had told her this is what I was going to do. And about 2:30 in the afternoon, I Googled AA Wichita, and the central office phone number popped up. And I called it. And I said, I think I'm an alcoholic. And they said, what part of town do you work in? And I told them, and they said, there's a meeting real close to you. What time you get off work? I said, 5. They said, you ought to go, right? It's right there. There's a meeting at 5:30. I said, well, I'm looking at the website here. There's also an 8 o'clock. Maybe I could just go to the 8 o'clock meeting. And the guy on the phone said, no, just go. Just go straight there. And that was what I did. I left work. I drove over there. Got there about 5 minutes early. I'm sitting in the parking lot. And I'm remembering my rules. 2 things about AA. You don't want to drink and you're real screwed up. I knew I didn't want to drink. And I'm sitting there kind of starting to watch people walk in and out and hearing some of their conversations. I thought, am I that screwed up? I don't know. And again, it was like a voice from God and just said, yes, you're that screwed up. And that walk across the parking lot, after, what would it be? 8 years of first step work, I guess is what I'll call it. I walked into the door of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a meeting of maybe 25, 30 people, and somehow they came to the conclusion that this was my first AA meeting. Very observant bunch in Alcoholics Anonymous. When a guy's been drunk for 15 years, sometimes we stick out. And so the leader kindly said, is this anyone's first meeting at Alcoholics Anonymous? I did raise my hand, and he gave a very abbreviated version of his story. And he came around the room, and they just did a first step meeting, and they talked about how they drank and how they didn't, and how they drank and how they didn't. And when it got to me, I just said, my name is Austin, I'm an alcoholic, and I can't stop drinking. And it was like concrete trucks had fallen off my shoulders. I was weightless. It was by far the most humble, the most just what maybe you want to call it spiritual. It was the most cathartic moment of my life to say that in that meeting in front of those people. It went on around the room. The meeting got over. I had one guy come up and say, here's my number. Call me if you need something. And then everybody left and went home. Nobody stuck around. And here's the thing, when you're the preacher's kid and you're growing up in church, I thought the new guy was supposed to get a little tour of the facility and, you guys are going to give me the bag of cookies and the little candy that new church people get and, give me a little card. It's, what are your needs? You check off which ones, and then we'll have somebody that caters to that need give you a call. And I got one phone number from the guy that said, did you like how this went? I said, yeah. He said, we do this every day at 5:30. And that was the extent of my introduction. I was so pissed off. My hands were shaking, Because that one thing from since I was a child, if you treat me special, I'll feel normal. And if you treat me normal, I'll feel shunned. That is called a delusional ego. And I had no idea that was at the heart of my problem, but that was the beginning of it. Understanding what's going on. And on the drive home, when I'm thinking about how ungrateful these people are, I got home and I sat down and I realized I didn't have to drink. And the only reason I say have to rather than want to is I was thinking about alcohol and I wasn't jumping up to either buy it or get it or find it. And it had been years since that had happened. And I knew something happened in that room. That was all I knew. And I prayed to God that this would last until tomorrow and that I could sleep. And I didn't sleep real good. But I got up the next day and I truly just had this fatigued, 3 tossed, sweaty hours of a drying out drunk sleep. But this is now. This is today. It's like Scrooge, the Christmas morning, and he finds out there's still a chance. And I went back to that meeting that night. And I kept going back. And, it was probably a month or 2 before people kind of knew my first name and knew. That is in no way an indictment of Eastside. That is in no way an indictment of AA. I truly believe God gives you what you need. I see people, person after person after person, come in, it's my first meeting, and they get 10 hugs and 14 phone numbers. I think there's a reason I didn't. I had been sitting in the middle of the room my whole life. And now it's time to pull up a chair, tell me how you drank, and then shut up and listen, Austin. Just shut up and listen. And tomorrow, you can do this again. Go to work, come here. Go to work, come here. And heard people in meetings talk about sponsorship. I recognized a guy at one of my meetings as a contractor from here in town that I'd tried to sell stuff to. I sell supplies to contractors from, I guess I'll say, the civilian world. So I went up to him and I asked him, how he's doing and everything. And then I asked him to sponsor me, and he said no. And I didn't quite understand why he would want to miss out on this kind of opportunity. I mean, I had heard, so many people in meetings just rave about what they got out of sponsorship and what other people got from their sponsorship, and they'd spend half of a meeting share talking about how many people they sponsor. And so I thought, it's odd this guy would just say no. I said, I pushed. I said, do you have other sponsees? No. And that was the extent of his explanation. And so I keep seeing him, and finally he calls me one day and he goes, well, here's the thing. When I think of a sponsor, I don't think of me. But these steps saved my life. And if you want me to, I'll take you through them. Still one of the most humble things I've ever seen happen. Still really the way I approach sponsorship to this day. I'm really not here to ask you, I am not qualified for some of these things. I can tell you how I went through these steps and how these steps saved my life. So I said, great, what do I do? He said, read the doctor's opinion, call me on Friday, we'll talk about it. So I called him that Friday. I said, I read the doctor's opinion. He said, well, what were 3 things that jumped out? And I kind of started around, and he goes, you didn't read it, did you? I said, no, I didn't. He said, well, let's do this. Read the doctor's opinion, and then call me whenever you read it. I said, okay. So I finally did, and I sit down and I read it. And I'm only, 3-4 weeks into the deal. And frothy emotional appeals seldom suffice. Phrase after phrase after phrase. And it was the beginning of finding myself in those pages and finding out about people who drank just like I did. And then I couldn't help but skip ahead and start to read the first chapter and start to read the second chapter. And when I got to the part about the real alcoholic, it still to this day gives me goosebumps, where it breaks down a real alcoholic versus a problem drinker and a heavy drinker. What about the real alcoholic? And then so by the time I called him this time, he realized I was really going to want to talk about a lot of this stuff, and he was really not in the mood for a lot of that. And so we talked for about 30 minutes, and he said, well, going forward, here's what we'll do. I'm going to send you a first step kind of worksheet thing, but you got to promise me you'll go find some people from AA to talk to, because you're going to want to talk way more than I want to listen. And I have a feeling there's going to need to be a group maybe that you get to chat with or something, because I don't have time for all this. Here's what he said. He goes, I'm an alcoholic. I own a business. My entire family has alcoholics filled throughout it. I will never interrupt any of that to call you, but I will interrupt any of it if you call me. This is your life. This is your deal. So we began first step work, and we talked a lot about surrender and powerlessness, and I thought about the millions of times I'd try to stop and couldn't, the millions of times that I just thought I needed to manage. I had no idea that 8 years of drinking could be such great first step research, and that's what I'd done. I think there's 2 groups of people in AA. There's ones that work the first step to get to AA, and there's ones who work the first step after they get to AA. It doesn't make it easier, but it does make it simpler if you drank until the first step nuts and bolts were kind of knocked out to get you in the door. I was done arguing. I kind of like to bark a little bit and everything, but at the end of the day, I hear that said a lot, surrender to win. For me, it was about surrender to live. It was just about living more than it was about winning for the first time in my life. You think about prisoners of war and the way when they point the gun at them and they stick their hands in the air. It's not because they suddenly agree with the enemy. Eastern countries didn't suddenly adopt the Judeo-Christian ethic when they put their hands in the air. They just want to stay alive. And when the guy with the gun says, get on the bus, they get on the bus. What they don't do is say, now hold on, what's the food going to be like? Wherever you're taking me, I do keto, I've got some parameters on my diet, and what's the mattresses? How's the sleeping arrangements? They get on the bus because they want to stay alive. And it's identical to what happens sometimes when people come into AA. I want help. Well, you should. Well, hold on now. Let me explain to you what I need from you. Really? Sounds like you got a lot of ideas. And, those are great, but if you got them, do them. I'm just trying to tell you what I've done. So that was the first step with Ronnie. And when we got to 2 and 3, we did them kind of together. And I'm really getting into meetings at this point, and I'm going every day. And it truly is, like the literature talks about, your imagination will be fired and life will seem fresh. And he said, if you never drink again, you'll be horrible at running your life. Your job is not to become a better director. It's to not do that job anymore. AA isn't director's class. It shows you that you need to get out of the seat. And some people take that as a bad thing. I suddenly realized it was one of many things I don't have to do anymore. I don't have to try to be in charge. I don't have to try to be in control. I don't have to try to run. I'd taken that all as the same responsibility I had the drinking. I have to drink. I have to be mad. I have to hate you. I have to resent you. And then we got to what I hadn't been in meetings quite long enough yet to understand that the 4th and 5th steps are monumental. I did them quick enough that I kind of just thought, I'd done 3 and life was better, so let's do 4 and 5. And 1 resentment and 1 amend, I guess is what I'd say, skipping through a lot of that, is what's powerful for me. Everybody, a lot of people talk about their 4th step and all throughout my 4th step, I just realized I was in the center of all the problems I'd ever had, and it was that simple. For me and for many, it's not that simple. Things are not that clean. They're not that tight. But there's at least one where you realize that is all about me. And I had done that with my employers. I had resented about a guy they had hired, and him and I were both there at the same time. And then business was going to go in his direction, so I quit. Then that guy quit, so they called me back, and now I'm justified and vindicated. Same job I still have to this day. And that was my biggest resentment, that they had catered to that guy. And Ron said, so the guy that was married and had a family and a house, they sent him more business than the know-it-all drunk coming in at 10 and leaving at 3 every day. That's why you've been pissed off for 10 years? It's, well, when you put it like that. I thought I really had some justifiable grievances here, but here you are, And I don't see things the right way. And some of the others, like I said, you got family and ex, all this stuff. That one was just 100% right between the eyes. Yeah, you got a real point. And so as I began to make amends, all of them were pretty straightforward. I had one ex-girlfriend who I had decided to make amends to, and her mom, in fact, had been kind of a country club cokehead kind of drunk. She'd kind of find guy after guy after guy, and then she'd get DUIs and stuff and get sentenced to court. We had dropped her off at Eastside years prior, because her mom didn't have a driver's license. It was just kind of one of those full circle things. It's like, wow. So anyway, I call her and basically kind of go into how I had done some things in our relationship, and I just wanted to say, and she said, oh my God, is this an amends? She cut me off right before I even got going. Because her uncles had been drunks, and her dad had been a drunk, and her mom had been a drunk. And she said, you know what? I was no saint. Save your breath. You did some things. I did some things. Obviously, that was years ago. But I'll tell you this. If you really want to do AA, and you really want to be so different, then just be different. Because here's what AA people do. They quit drinking, and they get all spiritual, and they stay that way for about 4 months, and then they get drunk. And then they do it all over, and they tell you how sorry they are and how spiritual you're not, and then they get drunk. So if you want to be a different person, then you go be a different person. I can't promise standing here I would never drink again. I can promise I will never forget her saying that. If you want to be so different, then start being different. Quit preaching at me. Again, between that resentment and that amend, I have really been changed. I don't always see things the right way. I don't always handle things the right way. But if I don't drink, I always have another shot at doing it. As time had moved forward, by that time I had a couple years sobriety. I'd started dating Megan. And, her dad is an alcoholic and sober and in the program, and that's actually how I met her. And, when I came into AA, he was one of the initial people that I'd talk to. And, when you first come in, you're just saying everything you've ever done to whoever will listen. You don't necessarily think. And it was, about 6 months before, which really, you start to get this cathartic, freeing feeling. It's like a new guy, he'll have a month, and he'll come in and be like, hey, I did my fifth step finally. And you're like, with a pastor or a sponsor? No, some guy at the bus stop. I just had to do it, and I just did it. Jesus, this is freedom. Like, drunks won't talk so bad, we don't even care if anybody understands what we're talking about. The guy at the bus stop just nodded his head and was like, happy for you. So I told my father-in-law, Mark, about a month before we got married, I said, if I'd have known how this was all going to go, there's a lot of things I shared with you that I probably wouldn't have. And again, here's a perspective issue. He said, you and me both, buddy. We both got a few things I'd rather not discuss at the Thanksgiving dinner. So see, the traditions have real weight when you start to live like that. So work had gotten better, life had gotten better, AA was great. I had gotten involved with Central Office, which again was the first place I called. It took me 2 years to realize, that place I called that was the beginning of my sobriety, I wonder if they might need some help, not just 2 years in. It's quite a bit of time before you start thinking about real gratitude. So I'm involved there, and my mom got cancer. And things went bad, but she went to Mayo, had some family friends kind of help out. And so this was about the year that I got engaged to be married. She got cancer. And had treatment and had it go into remission before my wedding day. And I had mentioned, how influential my parents were and how loving they were and how they really were the last people to never, as an example, in college when I got drunken, I got to that place where I'd lose things, hats and coats and jewelry and that sort of stuff. And then my mom had gotten me this really ornate, expensive gold cross when I was in high school with a sprung herringbone chain, and I lost it. And it was like everything. I didn't pay for it. What do I care? And so I'd been sober, whatever it was, 3-4 years when we got married. And the night before my wedding, walking into the rehearsal dinner, my mom pulled me aside and said, hey, I want to give you something. And we kind of walk over, and she gives me a jewelry box, and I open it up, and it's that cross that I thought was gone. And she said, when you started to get bad, I stole this from you. Like, I thought she found it, And she said, all she said was, and now I'm giving it back. And I just said, thanks. The chips are great. But moments like that are what make me absolutely love this program. So we got married the next day. We went to Greece for our honeymoon. That's in September. That November, my mother's cancer relapsed. And shortly thereafter, they said she didn't have long. And we got her a little one-bedroom house that we rented here and just on the east side of Wichita so that Dad and I could go visit her. Dad was still living out west. He'd come during the week, go home on the weekends to preach. It was closer to my work, so I could spend time in and out of there. And, this is where everything starts to come together as far as meetings and literature and all this stuff. And I got all this stuff going on. And I never once thought I want to drink. What I thought was I want to hide. But I drank enough to know booze didn't do that anymore. So I got one of two things. I can either let God be my hiding place, or I can start going back to the garage. Because I used to hide there real good. And so every day it was go see Mom and just watch her, just deteriorate. She had this really rare skin cancer. It was beneath the skin, and it was just... And right to the end, she was just grateful for the help and for this and for that. And the thing that was, this is just me being real, within that last couple months, the thing that was the hardest is I'd go to meetings, and I'd hear people with 2 weeks that drank again come in and tell me they'd relapsed. And I'm thinking about my mom's cancer relapse. I don't know that I want to compare these two things. You want to drink. But don't stand here and tell me that this compares to that. No control, no power. You talk about powerlessness. It's not related to lifestyle. It's not related to anything. She's just got skin cancer and she's going to die. Last time I saw her was about 5 days before her death, and I got up that morning and I had to be with her all day. 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. until the hospice people came in. Just me and her. And on the way over there, I literally thought to myself, I could call Dad and just tell him I need to go to a meeting. He'd get that. He knows. And something said, not this time. Not this time. And so I got there and I went in and the nurse told me the things I needed to do, and she left, and it's just me and Mom. She falls asleep. She's sitting there just, dying, drool, all of that. And all I could think of was, how many times did she walk in a room and see me like that? Hundreds. Where I had ruined the party, missed the deal, done the whatever. And here she is. I don't even want to do this for a week. And she's done this for 30 years with me. And she started to wake up, and I said, "Are you hungry?" And she said, "I'll eat some peaches." And I got this little bowl of peaches, and I was standing there feeding them to her because she couldn't lift her hands. And she said, "You're sweet like your dad." And then, she ate. I keep giving her these morphine drops every hour. I have to put them on her tongue. I was there 5 hours before it even dawned on me. This house has like $80,000 worth of narcotics in it. I still did think of it. It was just a lot later than it would have been. And I sat down on this little futon in front of this TV, and the college football game was on. There was nowhere on earth I'd rather been. All of this, everything I do about being a son, about being a husband, about how I approach my Christian faith, everything is just about these very simple principles that I almost had to die to get my head around. And I thank God that I didn't, but I also thank God that it happened so that I could meet you guys and that I could be here. And then I could promise my mom before she left this world, I'm going to take care of Dad, and I'm going to take care of Megan. And it's all because of these principles that I can do that. Thanks.